Hi, welcome. Today we're going to explore the role mindfulness can have in helping you achieve the right mindset for job searching and interviews. I'm delighted to welcome Claire Griffin, a qualified mindfulness coach and teacher, alongside having a career in recruitment, which is also alongside her career in consulting. Welcome, Claire. So nice to have you join.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Dominique. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, very much appreciate the invite and this opportunity to talk about something that I'm so passionate about.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to have heard your background and how you got into the mindfulness side of stuff. Would you like to share a little bit about how you found mindfulness in your career?
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. So I had a long career in recruitment and headhunting for the marketing industry. So I used to recruit for a lot of advertising agencies, data marketing agencies, and most recently, obviously, digital marketing was very much an area that I was active in. I was in recruitment for more than 25 years. So I had my own business a couple of times, actually worked for other people. So it was a very fast-paced industry, and I interviewed a lot of people during that time, and I spoke to a lot of people who were experiencing stress in their jobs. When you're interviewing people, sometimes they are pouring their heart out to you quite a lot, and if you're seeing a recruitment consultant, there is a possibility that you might be unhappy and stressed in the job that you're currently in. So I got to hear a lot of those stories. And what I didn't realise so much at the time is not only was I listening to people perhaps who were suffering stress in their jobs, and of course help coaching them through with the interview techniques and that type of thing, and helping people with interview nerves. But I was also experiencing a lot of stress myself, and that kind of built up over a period, over a number of years. And I kind of came a little bit from that sort of old school of sort of, stress is what I thrive on, and work hard, play hard. It always used to be. And that was fine up to a point until it wasn't. And I went through a period of time when I experienced some real family and some really upsetting, and a kind of upsetting couple of years in my family environment. And I realized that I wasn't coping. I realized that I personally had got to a point where my stress levels were so sort of activated constantly that this sort of extra level of anxiety and worry based on some very real fears about my parents' health, etc. And that stress on top of what was already there was causing me to really experience problems. And I self-identified that I needed some help. And I've been doing a little bit of yoga, as many of us do, and there's been some meditation exercises at the end of my yoga classes. And I just kind of got this kind of glimpse into the door of maybe some peacefulness and some ability to kind of lower those stress levels, just a glimpse of that maybe once a week. And I thought maybe this is something I need to explore more. So to cut a long story short, I started working with some apps and some things online and thought, I think this is something that I do find beneficial and I'd like to get deeper into. And I did my first mindfulness-based stress reduction 8-week course as a participant back in 2013 actually. And I was just blown away by how much difference it made to me and how much difference I could see it making to the other people participating on the course, and that in a relatively short amount of time, which is 8 weeks, I could experience such a really profound change. And it really opened my eyes to the possibilities and benefits of having a meditation practice.
So how would you recommend that if we wanted to start this process, where could we start?
I think that the more we do this and embed this good habit, the more moments you may find during your day where you spontaneously sort of find yourself, standing to answer your question of how we introduce that into our lives, anytime you want is the answer to that. Because meditation is available to us whenever we stop and take a pause and drop in to the breath, into the body, into the 5 senses. We don't have to carry a special mat for it. We don't have to wear special clothes for it. We don't have to be in a particular place for it. We're carrying around this whole body that can help us to regulate our stress reaction if we practice just kind of dropping into it. And we're coming into concepts about, you know, mindfulness being in the now, being in the present. What we are dropping into the present, but the way that we're dropping into the present is to focus on what our experience actually is in the body and in the movement of the breath in this moment. I can't experience a breath that I had 2 weeks ago or a breath that I took 2 seconds ago. And I can't actually experience a breath that I'm going to take in 5 minutes. The only breath I can experience, so not imagine or remember or think about, but actually experience as a physical sensation, I can only do that in this present moment. So we're coming into the present via the physical sensations of the body, and the breath is such a handy tool for most people to use to bring them into that sense of, we talk about stepping out of the busy doing mode and coming into a being mode.
Absolutely.
So we're using the breath as an anchor, a kind of way of pulling us into what is actually going on for us in this moment right now. And I say most people, the breath, because obviously some people may have asthma or they may have issues around using the breath. And if that's true for anyone practicing meditation, then the alternative to using our breath is to identify an area of pressure or contact somewhere in the body that you can tune into that physical sensation. It might be your feet against the floor, might be sitting bones against what you're sitting on, might just be holding one hand with the other hand, or having a hand against your legs perhaps as you're sitting or standing. But just by tuning into, what does that feel like? So really sensing into that. And that just kind of brings us into that pause. And we might notice when we start to do that, that our minds are constantly kind of rushing off somewhere else, that they're going off into the future or the past. They're kind of flipping about, they're running away with us. And we can just, whenever we realize that's happened, we just notice that's happened, and we just bring attention back to that anchor again. And we'll do that again and again during our practice. And that's all helping to establish those neural networks, that focused attention, distraction, becoming aware of the distraction, reorientation of attention, focused attention. That is essentially the practice.
Excellent.
That's the workout, if you like. People think it's when you're just focused, but actually it's that whole cycle that is the practice.
And it makes sense, because when we think about how we exercise our bodies, it's not just about, doing a push-up. It's about the whole element of the warm up, the warm down, going back, repeating that push-up, and continually building that strength that we have in our muscles. And the brain, as you say, it works in a similar way. It builds up gradually. And it needs to do that because of the way it's structured. So what it wants to do is to always default back to existing ways of working and habits, because it's wired to be energy efficient, and that's the most energy efficient way to do things. So being able to help practice it, coming back to things, and to be able to strengthen the idea of focused attention that's so important in our jobs, in productivity, in forming memories, in anything and everything, learning new things. It's really, really, really useful to be able to practice your brain to get better at focused attention and bringing it back, and not multitasking, which unfortunately we are not only used to doing, we're sort of expected to do. It's that idea that people multitasking meetings, of course, because they're amazing. Of course I can look at my phone, run emails and listen to you. And actually the reality is we can't. Our brain doesn't parallel process. It just switches its focus. And the more you try and force it to switch focus quickly, the harder it gets to maintain focus on one thing. So one of the things that's brain protective between now and later in life is actually to reduce the multitasking you give it, because actually the more you multitask, the more likely you're to have memory issues later in life. So it makes sense to practice now, and there's everything you've explained sounds so achievable, and so I almost went into a breathing state myself when you're talking. I had to bring myself back so that I didn't just sit around.
If this was actually a session what I was teaching, I would of course be encouraging people to do do that exactly now, but I'll maybe leave that towards the end of the podcast.
You know, it's so
yeah.
But yeah, I guess the one point is, and the question that I have is that it all sounds so achievable and accessible, and I love mindfulness, but there are days when I just forget, where I forget that I can breathe and stop. So what's your kind of advice for building it into your daily routine, so that there are elements and cues, I guess, for your brain, so that it kind of cues you to do it?
Yeah. The sort of granddaddy, if you like, of mindfulness, who created John Kabat-Zinn, who created the very first mindfulness-based stress reduction course over in the States in Massachusetts Teaching Hospital many years ago. He actually, I think there's a quote from him. It says something like, "Mindfulness isn't difficult. You've just got to remember to do it." And this, of course, is part of the issue, because it is so accessible. We sometimes have, it can be a challenge for people to establish that good habit into their lives. So one of the ways that you can do this is to do a more intensive course if it's appropriate for you, because actually when you do an intensive, for example, an 8-week course, there's an accountability about coming together as a group each week in a live teaching situation, of course, where you are just more likely to go away and do it if you're going to come back in as a group and talk about it the next week. And there's that support and that ability to work with a teacher guiding you and answering any questions or concerns that you might have about your practice as well. So that's one way. But in terms of just sort of how we advise people to sort of, or how we explore establishing that good habit with people, you can set particular times of day when you're going to practice. And remember, practices, don't have to be on the course, they're 30 minutes or sometimes 45 minutes long, but you can meditate in much shorter practices throughout the day. So maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe just a couple of minutes. So you can attach them to another activity that you might be doing. So you might think, well, actually, I'm going to do it, I'm going to mindfully drop into a short practice just before I have my breakfast, and then just before I have my lunch, and then just before I have my dinner, or just after those. You can use other activities during the day. So, for example, having your breakfast, having your lunch, having your dinner, or any activity, having a shower, washing up, anything, as a mindful meditation exercise. So what we would call an informal practice. So you can bring full awareness through the 5 senses to anything that you do. So if I am, for example, having a shower, I'm going to listen to the water in the shower. I'm going to really feel the water on my skin. I'm going to smell the shower gel that I'm using. I'm going to look at the water as it's maybe on my hand or my body. I'm going to listen to the sound of water. So I'm going to perhaps work around all my 5 senses and really be there for the activity and the experience of showering.
I love that. So accessible, again, something that you always have. Yes.
Getting back to sort of your core question, which was really, how do we remember to do it? You could attach it to moving from one room to another, for example. So if I stand up and I'm going to go from one room, if we are still in an office situation, not everyone is at the moment, but if I'm going to go from, or maybe one Zoom meeting to another Zoom meeting, I'm just going to take some time in between just to kind of press that sort of reset button with a short meditation practice. So perhaps, exploring what works for you, maybe beginning of day, end of day, in between certain tasks, setting an alarm, setting a beeper on your phone to remind you to do it. All of those can be really helpful. It is really just about embedding that good habit, because we've not been brought up to do this very often. And I'm talking, about the culture I was brought up in, which is the UK culture. So to a certain extent, a Western culture. It's not everyone's experience. And increasingly, children are being taught mindfulness practices. But the analogy that I very often use, and other teachers very often use, is the one of brushing our teeth. So, 100 years ago, people didn't brush their teeth every day. And then doctors, dentists, realized that to maintain dental health, you needed to brush your teeth first thing in the morning and last thing at night before you went to your teeth first thing in the morning and last thing at night before you go to bed. So you don't hear people saying, I tried that brushing my teeth once and it felt great, but I haven't really done it for a few months. I just sort of don't seem to be able to find the time, keep forgetting.
So true, yeah.
So that kind of mental flossing, if you like, we do have to make an effort. And there is, I think, you have to make a commitment to doing it. You have to set an intention, very much like, you mentioned exercise. You have to want to do it, quite frankly, and you have to kind of know that there will be benefits from doing it, and therefore that it is worth remembering to do it and making time and space for it in your schedule. And maybe simple things like that, just putting it in your diary every day to remind you, so that your Outlook or Gmail just beeps at you. And so valuing the time, I think there's this thing of that, we're very quick to put in the meetings and the shopping list and we've got to do those things. Valuing this alongside all those other things and giving it the space in your life that it needs. And that space doesn't have to be huge, but it does need to be there.
Absolutely. I think that's it. We fit so much of our time into social media these days. The time that we spend scrolling aimlessly down feeds, actually that's probably time which we don't even need to get rid of, that time of aimless scrolling. We can just partition a tiny bit of it to something that is a lot more mindful. It's amazing how much time we do have in our days that we don't realize. So from what you've described so far, one of my favorite parts and activities of a working day is making cups of tea. So keeping hydrated is important, but tea I'm just completely in love with. And I'm just thinking, the way you've described everything, for me, it will be the time that the kettle's boiling will be my time to start to get into the calming of the mind. And then actually drinking the tea, that's when I'll start to look at using all of my five senses. And that's something which, if I can tag it together and have it as a cue, I'll be doing it a lot during the day, which will hopefully give repetition. It's something which sounds so achievable for all of us, and something which will be beneficial. And a bit like exercise, in the fact that the more you do something, the easier it becomes.
Certainly.
Okay, that's also helpful. So the more the more likely we are to be able to just go into our state and work on it.
Yeah, the more I think that you deliberately and intentionally set those moments and those practices during your day, the more spontaneous practice may arise. In other words, as well as those times that you've set, and as you said, it's a great idea. Kettle goes on, and I'm just going to this is my cue. I'm going to cue up my mindfulness practice and drink this tea mindfully. The more we do this and embed this good habit, the more moments you may find during your day where you spontaneously sort of find yourself, standing in a queue or perhaps going for a walk and thinking, I'm just gonna stop now and just really be present with what's around me. And that starts to become something, as you say, you start to become, and I hesitate to use the word better at it, but certainly it becomes more accessible to you. It becomes more kind of woven into your life, rather than it being, this is when I'm practicing and this is when I'm not. The edges start to blur, and it starts to be more embedded, I think is what I'm saying.
No, that makes total sense. And again, reassuring, encouraging. So there is the fact you can have progress in mindfulness, again, makes it just a little bit easier to start and to think, okay, well, I'm building up. It doesn't have to be perfect now, but it's going to be becoming more and more ingrained in my life, and it will be more helpful. So again, that's just good to know, because some things, especially with mindfulness, where, as you say, in the culture that we live in here in the UK, it wasn't in our era taught at school. So I certainly came to it a lot later in life. And it was something where I thought, actually, it was hard at the start. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just not right for it. Maybe it's like I can't, do an Olympic athlete event. It's just not right for me. I've just not got the skill. but that's not the case actually. It's accessible to anyone, and it's training
Yeah.
and practice. And over the years, I found it becoming easier over time. And then for
Yeah.
various reasons, it drops out of my daily routine, and then you
Yeah.
have to start back, and it just feels exactly like exercising the body, which
Yeah.
you build it up over time, and that
Yeah.
brings us into a kind of a slightly separate view, but also linked, the idea of movement. So
Yeah.
actually in the
Yeah.
world, we don't really move that much during the day, except for my kind of getting up to go make a cup of tea. I'm pretty much sitting down all day. Um,
Yeah.
and that's a shame, because movement, our bodies are again very much wired to have movement. That's what,
Yeah.
originally evolved being very, very much about movement, moving from different places during a day, during a month. We were quite we tracked around to find food, to find different places of safety to live. Whereas now we live a very static life, and even
Mm.
more so with everything that we've built technology-wise, because
Yeah.
we don't need to leave our rooms for almost anything. I always remember the film WALL-E, where there's just this kind of section where there's just these floating beds with very, very fat humans looking through, and I don't feel that far away from that at the moment. I feel like that could just so,
That's true. My niece, when she was very young, wanted to watch that movie, and I was like, "Oh, well, okay, I'll watch it with you on babysitting." I just thought it was the most fantastic film, and I always remember that scene that you're talking about.
yeah,
And whether exactly just this kind of blob of just like viewing a screen and on these beds that just carry them around. And I think that there are days when it's particularly with the limits that some people are living within at the moment, with various levels of lockdown, etc., and working from home. We're we're really not using our bodies very much at all on some days.
exactly. And that has not only an impact on our core muscles and our waistline, it also has an impact on our brains, because when we move
Yeah.
and we do some brisk exercise, and there's BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that gets released, and that's something that helps our brain rewire and grow and form new habits. So the less we move, the less our body has actually creating the things we need to better think, to problem
Yeah.
solve, learn new habits. And I, it's kind of at the start of lockdown, it was great, because suddenly all the wonderful exercise classes that maybe you didn't have time to check across London or across whatever town you live in to get to suddenly became online. And so there was this kind of utopia at the start of lockdown, where you sort of felt that everything was accessible, and the novelty of it, you could get involved. So the amount of moving furniture from living rooms and other places that was going on to make space for exercise was immense.
Yeah.
But like so many things, ultimately that dropped off. And now finding exercise kind of feels like a chore that's associated with a different period of lockdown, which wasn't great overall. And I think that for me, there's kind of like this effort level where I think exercise is about doing that 45-minute class. And actually that's a lot kind of to fit into a day. But there are other elements, and you talked about some of them before, about the idea of it's a 2-minute moment, a 3-minute pause. And there's studies that have shown that even just taking a 3-minute pause every hour and doing something like stretching out. So I remember that about 20 years ago, they came out with all these kind of pictures of how to do exercises at your desk that involved kind of stretching and small exercises.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually do have a very good effect on your brain, because they help reset things. What have you found that goes alongside, from a physicality movement perspective, that can fit alongside the mindfulness to kind of double the benefit, I guess?
No, I mean, certainly mindful movement is very much part of the practice. And it's interesting you use the word stretching, because that a lot of the movements are very much based on stretching. They're originally based on hatha yoga poses, actually, but they've evolved and been adapted over the years. And particularly nowadays, when many people are teaching in Zoom, or perhaps if you're teaching a participant, or you've got participants who have mobility issues, and maybe you're not going to be able to get down on the floor and do yoga movements that they can be doing sitting in a chair, or you can do them standing. But it's very much about it's a moving meditation rather than exercise. So it's not brisk exercise, it's not cardio exercise. Stretching movements, and really slowing those movements down and noticing what happens, in the body, and as you're moving. So it's really the same as a meditation that you might be doing sitting still, but we've introduced movement into it. And we use that as well to explore our edge. And what we mean by exploring our edge is just noticing when you're getting to that moment when you're moving from making an effort into making too much effort. So when you're moving from, I'm the best way I can do that, I think, is to demonstrate it. So that if I'm one person, you know, if I say, I'm going to let's raise our hands. For some people, depending on their physical, you know, sensations in that moment, that might feel like I'm making an effort. That might feel like I'm straining and I've got discomfort and I've got pain. Yeah. And so can we just pull back from that? Can I just find that moment, that edge between I'm making an effort, but I'm not making too much. As one of our qualities or attitudes of mindfulness is non-striving, not trying too hard, not trying to get anywhere, not trying to do anything in a particular way. So we can explore that through movement. So yeah, and that might be, you know, that's enough, that's where I'm going to stop, and it might be that. And we might notice on the other side of the body, we instinctively think, oh, well, on this side, I was happy with that. So on this side, it's going to be the same. And actually, you may find that no, it's not the same on this side of the body. So really kind of tuning in to physical signals that the body might be giving us.
That is so true, and it's something that I'm a dancer, and I explored that. And there's the idea that actually we're not symmetrical in terms of our abilities, and our capabilities was a rude awakening when I was young. It was just thinking I had one side better than the rest was kind of a weird kind of dichotomy. But it is really true, and because again we're so used to being visual and being physical in the way we've evolved. I love the idea of being able to connect with meditation practices through a physical activity, because that helps us just realize so much easier. It's less conceptual, it's real. And to be able to make that link, that must just really, really help in terms of being able to understand what it means not to force ourselves, not to I guess, to take a pause from what we're being told every day at work, which is always strive to be better, and at home as well, and parenting, the pressure you have to be the best parent and know the newest ideas. It's really nice to think that actually we don't have to. There's a moment and there's a benefit to not striving, to just enjoying understanding. Brilliant.
I'm getting to know my own body. I'm listening to my own body. I'm actually going to tune, because a lot of people are very disconnected because of what you've mentioned, which is we spend a lot of time up here in our thinking conceptual brains, not moving very much. A lot of people in this century in our society are very disconnected from their own bodies.
We are.
And so sometimes the practice can be about re-establishing that connection. And that has a wellness benefit to us as of and in itself. It also has a benefit of, by doing that, we sometimes, because our stress reaction, as we know, creates very real physical sensations in the body. So we explore this on the course, and this, you know, some people may experience a tightness in the chest, a clenching in the stomach, tight jaw, a headache. But because we're very disconnected and we're not listening to our own body signals, we very often don't hear those physical clues until they're really screaming at us, because our stress levels have actually got so high that they're now really loud. So by starting to reestablish that connection with the physical, by deliberately doing that in our practice repeatedly, we can start to tune into our early warning system more skillfully.
Absolutely.
And of course, the earlier we tune in to our stress levels rising, the more likely we're going to be able to de-escalate them. Rather than waiting until it's so strong that it's going to take quite a lot of to come back from. So all of this has a value, and also just the actual active stretching itself, as you said, Dominique, that in itself has a value to us. So it's all connected. It's all about nourishment, really, and support.
It is. Our brains and bodies are wonderful. As you say, they're fantastic. And the fact we've disconnected ourselves so much means that a lot of what's instinctive is a lot harder to find. I mean, we've seen that with our diets. The things that we crave, we often don't realize what it's actually for, what it is, the vitamin or the mineral that we're missing, and we just pop some more, junk food down it.
Yeah.
But actually, if we just listened a little bit more and realized that after we ate that junk food, we don't feel any better, let's try something else, then we'd become far more tuned. And again, that's something which I'm loving, seeing the growth of nutrition for well-being, and reconnecting ourselves with our cravings and understanding what they mean. Another point to note is that if we have been in a really quite continually stressful situation, and we use the work context, but actually at the moment we are all in quite a continually stressed situation. If we're new to this, let's not be discouraged if it takes a little bit of time for us to actually see the benefits, because it just takes this, not the same amount of times, but it takes a significant amount of time to undo the stress response we've got ourselves hyped up to. So I think
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's important as well to say that with one of the paradoxes of mindfulness is we're not trying to change, we're not trying to de-stress when we practice, because we're non-striving. We're not going to try and relax. We're not going to actually go in. I'm not going to sit down, do my meditation and say, okay, I'm stressed and I don't like this and I want to change it. It sounds very strange, because you sort of say, well, hang on a minute, why am I doing it then, Claire, if I'm not going to be able to relax? But by kind of stepping away from that trying to change, what paradoxically seems to happen is that things will, if we leave them alone and turn towards them and actually acknowledge that, like acknowledge that we're stressed, notice that what's happening in the body as we're stressed, notice what emotions are around, without judging them, and accepting, which is a really big one, accepting that this is how I am in this moment. This is how I'm feeling. This is my experience right now, without trying to change it. That paradoxically, over time, things will start to just settle down by themselves. I always think in my head about that advice you to say, when the car's kind of skidding off the road, just take your hand off the wheel, rather than
try to correct.
Letting be, letting go. Just this is how I'm feeling, and it may not be pleasant, and it may be painful, it may be very unpleasant. But can I just be with it in this moment, in this meditation? Can I just allow it to be there, even if just for a moment?
And that, from a neuroscience perspective, is actually really, really key, because, well, again, what we so often do in our lives today is that we're dealing with a lot of stress, but we're told we can't show it and that we should rise above it. And actually we don't. From a brain perspective, we don't rise above it. What happens is that we try and suppress it, but in the background, all of the chemical factors, the hormonal factors of whatever we're feeling, so if it's stress, that's going on in the background, and your brain has to use extra mental energy to suppress it. So then your mental performance goes down by trying to suppress it. You get exhausted a lot more quickly. And so the idea of acknowledging, and now with the pandemic, hopefully sharing, feeling more comfortable sharing with people how you're feeling, will really help in terms of actually just taking the gas off the pedal for your brain. Let it process, let it live those experiences and do things that will make more resilience going forwards. Because overall, that's what our bodies are trying to tell us. Something, acknowledge it, and that actually will help it pass. Yeah,
exactly. So it's interesting you're saying about it. The more we try to suppress it, the more energy draining it is. It's kind of like using a sort of mobile phone analogy. It's I'm running too many apps, and so in order to save the energy problem, we're going to open some more apps to find a solution to it. It's just going to drain us even more. It's like, no, just close it all down, just come into the body, come into the senses, just notice. And as you know, and there is this element in, you know, foundational attitude of mindfulness, as well as acceptance and non-striving. There's 8 in total, actually, but one of them is self-compassion, and being kind to ourselves and acknowledging when we're feeling stressed. And as you say, there's no shame in that. These are very real. You know, this is not something we've made up. These are real chemical, physical, hormonal reactions in the body that have been triggered by our brains, and they're real, and they're there, and they are natural, and in some instances vital for our survival, in other instances not so vital right now, you know, and not making a kind of enemy of our own stress, if that makes sense. You know,
No, no, it does. We have demonized stress as being some sort of show of weakness. If you're stressed, that means you can't cope, and therefore you're not up to the task, which is absolute rubbish from the point of view of a body and brain perspective. So yeah, and I do think we are seeing a shift in terms of being able to acknowledge that, to share that, and to incorporate it into our daily lives, and to use it as a positive marker. If something's making us stressed, let's evaluate why, and is there something we can do to stop it triggering that, or is this something we want to remove from our lives because it's not helpful to us on a very physical level as well as a mental level. So I do think that we are seeing a turning point in terms of, certainly from the UK point of view, culturally, talking about it and addressing it and acknowledging it is becoming more mainstream. And of course, this is where mindfulness practices are so important, because over time, they actually rewire the areas of the brains that are involved in all of this emotional regulation and memory formation. So the 2 key areas that are involved are the hippocampus and the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC we call it. So the hippocampus is an area of the brain associated with memory, emotion, and resilience. And the ACC is an area of the brain involved in focused attention, regulating behavior and emotional control, and effective decision making. So if we can have mindfulness train those areas of the brain, actually we're going to be able to better handle whatever life throws at us. So whether it's job searching now, trying to cope with a pandemic, or whatever it is that comes in the future, our brains will be feeling a lot more ready for life. And the better we train our brains during our life, the more protected they are later in our life from things like dementia. So it's worth incorporating mindfulness practices into our lives from any time of any stage of life, in fact. So let's talk a little bit. So when we leave a job, actually, what changes in our lives, and how does that impact our brain? Well, from day one to the next, we actually lose a lot of our continual connection that we have with our teams and colleagues, that very human connection that we're used to during our day and that humans thrive on. We also lose part of our daily routine, and our lives become a lot more ambiguous generally. So with that uncertainty of well, where is the next job going to come from? What am I going to do next? And that process of losing our human connection, our daily routine, and also not knowing what's going to come next, well, that triggers that fear response in the brain, that fight or flight. And it starts to get that stress response going in our bodies. So we can feel uncomfortable. Actually, we can have sweaty palms, our heart rate can increase. But also the key things to note from a point of view of helping yourself go into finding the next job is that when we're in a fear response, the parts of our brain responsible for rational thinking and forward planning are inhibited. So are the parts that help control and regulate our emotions. So we suddenly become controlled by emotional parts of our brain, and we're much more likely to become overwhelmed by things. We're also more prone to seeing the glass half empty because our brain is in this extra cautious mode where it processes everything as a potential threat to our survival. It really wants to keep us safe, and it's a risk officer and a survival prediction machine. So it's running lots of different worst case scenarios so that it can be better prepared should they actually materialize. Now, all of these response reactions are great. They're really impressive from the brain. But actually, when we're trying to be rational thinkers, when we're trying to problem solve, when we're trying to job search, those can often get in the way. And when you add in this layer of the pandemic, where our brains are actually processing a very real threat to survival, one that's invisible and that actually is uncontrollable, it's proving to be uncontrollable, we are in overdrive from that kind of stress response and fear response.
Yeah.
So for our audience, if you're feeling anxious or fearful after you leave your job, Actually, don't worry. That's a lot of your brain trying to help you, trying to keep you safe. But what we can help you through our chat today is to find some practices and techniques that will help you get back control of the parts of the brain that help you forward plan, decision make, and that help you regulate your emotion. So, how would you be able to apply the practices of mindfulness and meditation and a bit of the movement stretching into situations like job searching and interviewing?
In terms of job searching, I think just having, that as we've been talking about, that kind of daily practice and those daily moments when you drop in, and really kind of come into the body and into the five senses, and help that kind of continual sort of de-escalation of stress process. That's going to help you with your job searching, with your creative thinking, with your positivity, with your confidence as well over time. When it comes to actually to job interviews, I think there's some techniques that you can use either prior to going into interviews, or even during the interviews themselves. So I would say prior to going into an interview, if you can sort of go into, if this is a face-to-face interview situation, now increasingly people are not being interviewed in face-to-face situations, they're being interviewed on video conferencing software. So if it was in a face-to-face, you're going into an office or a building to be interviewed, just taking some time to maybe go into the toilet before, you go into the interview, perhaps just doing some stretches, yourself. Maybe that there's a kind of confidence pose, a star pose, where you put your arms up and your legs, doing that. Just kind of, maybe just doing some movements to help with that, maybe that sort of stress in the shoulders, just those sort of simple movements. Maybe just doing the kind of shaking out, just kind of help sort of bring the body alive a bit, get some oxygen, get some blood flow. They can all be helpful when you're going in. Also just using your mindfulness meditation technique. So maybe just doing that kind of dropping in onto the breath, doing a 5-minute meditative exercise as a way of preparing for going in to the interview. And of course, if you're in a video conferencing interview, prior to that, you're going to be at home. It's going to be, you don't have to go and lock yourself away somewhere. You can actually just do that, wherever your computer is before you actually go into the meeting. It's a really good way to prepare yourself, to kind of center yourself before going into the interview. During the interview itself, you can still use those techniques of just kind of dropping down onto the breath, dropping down perhaps onto the sensation of contact between your feet and the floor, or as I've mentioned before, I think sitting bones against whatever you're sitting on. You might actually tune into holding one hand with another hand. That can be grounding, and it can feel supportive and stable for some people. And if you're sitting at a desk, they might not see you do that. And if you're sitting on Zoom, they won't know that you're doing that. Or maybe just hands against the lap. So just those kind of little moments of just checking in with the physical, checking in with what's happening now, they can help kind of pull us back into the present and help ground us. And the other thing I would say about being in an interview and being aware and present for what the other person is saying. So having been a recruitment consultant, having taken feedback from many, many clients who've conducted interviews, something which does come up quite often is they didn't really answer the question. So very often when we're in an interview situation, perhaps we are feeling stressed, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next, rather than listening to what the person in front of us is actually saying. So can we really listen to what they're saying? And then that will give us more potential, more chance of actually answering the questions that they've asked us, rather than answering the question that we think they've asked us, and maybe not answering in full. So just kind of simple techniques. They are techniques actually which are also useful for people that perhaps are nervous in public speaking. So that kind of dropping onto the breath, maybe taking a few deeper breaths before you go into the interview, maybe in through the nose, out through the mouth, just kind of activating your parasympathetic nervous system, that sort of rest and digest mode by breathing. So just this stop and drop, as we call it very often, just this coming into the body. This can have a real kind of an effect of kind of bringing us into stillness, I think. And that is something which is calming for us, but it's also, you know, the other person opposite you will pick up on that a little bit, you know, that kind of stillness, that presence that can come across really well to the other person. So that would be my kind of simple guidance on that.
Brilliant. No, they're all so useful and again so accessible. It's not that you have to prepare anything new, bring anything new with you. You can use the tools within you to help form a better interview, to help job search with more, I guess, more energy, more focus than you might otherwise do. And I know that I certainly have been guilty of not answering questions in interviews before, where I've rambled off into a different direction. So that I'm going to use that next time I come to an interview situation. That is so, yeah. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much, Claire. This is brilliant. I think, you know, in terms of the takeaways from what you've discussed, for me, they are that this is accessible to everyone. We've got all the equipment we need within us, wherever we are at any time. So that's really helpful. You don't need to download an app. You don't have to go to a class. You can do it anytime. That we can incorporate it in a way that fits into whatever routine we're doing already. So we don't necessarily have to create something new, but we can if we want to. And we can use the joys of our calendars, which now do rule our lives. If we want to put something in, we can have something alert us for something positive. And that actually brain and body are linked together. So mindfulness linked with that physical awareness is something that will really help us kind of become not only better from a brain protective point of view, but also from a stress and from a physicality point of view as well. Gosh, fantastic. Just so helpful. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute...
Thank you. Thank you too, Dominic. Absolutely, you know, fascinating, and you know, a real pleasure for me to talk to you, you know, as a neuroscientist, and you know, a lot of what you were saying about the functions of the brain and mindfulness. You know, I know about that from my own you know, reading and teaching, but lovely to speak to somebody like yourself and have that kind of echoed back in a sense, you know. And I think it's I think that the actual practicing mindfulness, but also understanding, as you know, we've covered in this podcast, you know, understanding more a bit about actually what's happening in the brain. I think that is such a compelling package for people. I hope so, anyway, and I hope that this podcast, when people see it, is going to perhaps give people that might not have tried this before that little like, oh, well, maybe this might be for me, or encourage people that perhaps have tried it but have not been doing it recently for whatever reason to maybe explore it some more. So that's my hope. And it's been fantastic. This hour's flown past. I can't believe that was a whole hour that we were spent talking.
It's incredible, isn't it? Just so riveting. And how can people contact you? What's the best way? Are you a LinkedIn person, an email person?
I'm on LinkedIn, definitely, Claire Griffin, but I also have my email address, which is Claire, which is CLAIRE at clairegriffintalent.com. So it's Griffin is GRIFF for Freddie IN. So clairegriffintalent.com. So yeah, please contact me LinkedIn or by email. That would be lovely. If anyone's interested in exploring mindfulness further, then I'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm wishing you a great rest of day and rest of week.
Equally. Back to you, Dominic. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.